was changing for 20 centuries, or maybe 18, up until the scientific revolution. Human life largely kind of had a certain continuity. Most of us would have been peasant farmers, subsisting truly by the sweat of our brow. And then the scientific revolution kicked in. We began to learn a whole lot more about the natural world. And we began to lose touch with what it meant to be human, of how to truly and actually live. The time and the culture that we live in, the values by which our culture lives and pursues and rewards the shallowest of things. We value world-defined practicality more than we appreciate beauty or truth. In our culture, we can't value anything for its own sake, only its usefulness. And the pragmatism of this approach to life shows itself in the disintegration of our communities, our schools, our politics, our marriages, our families. We don't have relationships anymore, we build networks. The mindset even shows itself in the church, where the question too often is, just tell me what I need to do to go to heaven. Kind of a transactional view of salvation, right? Utilitarian. Just tell me what God wants, I'll do it. Just like you did to get into college, just like you did to get your first job. Tell me what God wants, I'll do it. We're excellent sheep, just checking boxes. Instead of asking the question, how can I best become like God and imitate His Son? That's a very different approach to the same basic issue. Now we begin to recognize that salvation is not so much a negative thing. You avoid hell. I'm just looking for eternal fire insurance, as one of my friends puts it. To instead, who am I supposed to be before God in the image of Jesus Christ? One is negative. What am I saved from? The other approach is positive. What am I saved for? But in our culture, so often, especially what I do, I meet people mostly, at least initially, who are interested in avoiding a nasty alternative and pursuing goodness and righteousness for their own sake. T.S. Eliot's poem reminds us that knowledge is not the same as wisdom. Know-how is not the same as insight. All of this busyness, the frantic pace of life that we live, doesn't lead to progress. It doesn't lead to utopia. It only brings us closer to death and farther from God the way we have lived in recent decades and centuries in our culture. Where is the life we have lost in living, he asks. We're more savvy about things than ever, and people don't know what life is for. In fact, we don't even know what a woman is for, apparently, at this point in our culture. Where is the life we have lost living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Passing tests and being wise is not the same thing. Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? Those are the questions, aren't they? And his words truly sound like something that could have been written yesterday. Could have been in the opinion section of the paper, somebody lamenting the meaninglessness of modern life. But what's amazing is Eliot was almost like a secular prophet with this kind of insight, in that he wrote these words summarizing his dissatisfaction with what was going on all the way back in 1934. Nearly 100 years ago. Tremendous insight. He already had a sense of what was developing and where it was going to lead and where we would wind up. And think about how the world was even back in 1934, how forward it is to what we have now, and take for granted now. This was years before World War II, before the Holocaust, before the modern state of Israel, before nuclear weapons, before antibiotics, before the polio vaccine. They were still living very primitive lives by what we would now consider to be acceptable living standards. And already he said there's a cost. There's a cost for the material progress we are making. Our age is now so technologically advanced, we live in what was often called the information age. They say that the sum total of human knowledge doubles every couple of years or so. Continuing education in most professions is a must, given that what you knew when you got your degree at 22 will be obsolete before you're even 30 these days. Our knowledge in medicine, engineering, computers, digital technology, it explodes at a staggering rate. Artificial intelligence is going to supposedly revolutionize things even more. We'll see. And yet it seems that the more we learn in technical and scientific realms, the less we understand about things that really matter. And that's what Eliot was trying to call people back to nearly a century ago already. It was a sobering prophecy, not merely of his own time, but of the decades that have followed as well, that the modern world and what it actually values ultimately leads to death. We have an electronic Tower of Babel all around us. bringing together a global village of frustrated people, a confused humanity, many of whom, again, no longer even know what gender they are. Education, certification, credentials can't help us with this. And a big part of what biblical wisdom literature is for and what it's about is helping us to see life under the sun more clearly, more completely, more correctly, and concretely. And so what wisdom literature in the Bible is really about, it's about character, it's about community, it's about business, domestic life, a legal system, political issues, religion itself. A fallen world has no guarantees in it anymore. But what the wisdom literature wants to say to the people of God who will listen to the Creator, which is why so often in wisdom literature God is called the Creator, the person or the one good. The wisdom literature wants to reconnect us with that. How can you maximize your chances for flourishing in the fallen world while still maintaining your integrity before God and living in the fear of God? That's what the wisdom literature is about. And so I've asked you to open your Bible, Proverbs chapter 3 this evening. I want to pick up and read in verse 13. Actually, I'm going to start reading in verse 11. Verse 13 is where I pick up on the screen. My son, do not reject the discipline of the Lord or loathe his reproof. For whom the Lord loves, he reproves, even as a father corrects the son in whom he delights. How blessed, therefore, is the man who finds wisdom, the man who gains understanding. For her profit is better than the profit of silver, and her gain better than fine gold, or credentials in modern education as well, we might add. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, and her left are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, all her paths are peace. And here comes verse 18. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her. And happy, blessed is the man who holds her fast. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps were broken up and the skies drip with dew. It's God's wisdom that you need to live well in the world that he built to work a certain way. She is a tree of life. That's a stunning image, don't you think? The tree of life. Does that ring a bell? Does that draw you back somewhere? Yeah, it draws you back to when all things were good. The world may be fallen and broken now, and it will remain so until Jesus returns, the fire comes, and all things are made new. But in the meantime, the way you find the tree of life, in other words, the way you find the flourishing life that God intended back when things were still good, all things were good, all the time, everywhere, is the wisdom that God offers in books like Proverbs. The image takes us back to the Garden of Eden. It reminds us of what was lost. When we were driven out and God placed cherubim with a flaming sword turning every direction to guard the way to the tree of life. The tree of life, of course, you hear that, you think immediately of immortality. And wisdom's not going to do that for you. You're still going to die unless Jesus comes back first. That's not in what sense wisdom is a tree of life anymore. It's about quality versus quantity. There is more to life than living forever. Think about it. When Jesus comes in John chapter 10 and says, I've come that they may have life and have it abundantly. What's he getting at? He's not just talking about eternal existence. When we talk about salvation as eternal life, too often we want to think about quantity. You live forever. But it's not simply existence. Otherwise, what's the difference between that and being in hell? The people in hell will exist forever. And yet the Bible doesn't call that life. What's fundamentally different is not the length, not the sheer fact of existence. What makes it different is the quality of existence. What do you experience? What do you enjoy? What is open to you while you exist? And that's what it means to truly have life. If it's just quantity, then the damned get eternal life in hell. But the Bible, in fact, refers in Revelation to the lake of fire as the second death. There's no life in that existence. It's about a quality of life, a quality of existence. And so, we're not talking about promises in the book of Proverbs, we're talking about principles. These things, in fact, the book of Proverbs in a lot of ways wouldn't be necessary if the world was not fallen, because what Proverbs and other wisdom books do, they don't guarantee success. Time and chance still happens to all, as the preacher says in Ecclesiastes. There's not guaranteeing there's going to be no setbacks and no suffering, but what it says is even in the fallen world, you can still live with the grain of the universe. You can still march with the beat of reality. You can still go with the flow of creation. You can still live in the spirit of the fear of the Lord and give yourself the best chance to flourish even in fallenness. And that's why the book of Proverbs ties the biblical wisdom to the metaphor of the tree of life. And so it's a great image for the point that the book wants to make. With all that man has lost in the fall, wisdom and her counsel, her advice represent the best way to build your best possible life after the fall and the coming of the curse. And so what we want to do in the few minutes that we have, in the balance of the time that we have tonight, is we want to look at how, and just a couple of examples, because obviously Proverbs covers a lot of ground. Lots of different topics, themes, ideas are covered in the book of Proverbs. But I want to look at just a couple of angles, a couple of perspectives the book of Proverbs offers that are a tree of life to us even today, and can be things that fundamentally challenge the fallenness of the thinking of the world that T.S. Eliot was talking about, that even he could see 100 years ago. There's something fundamentally off in all our knowledge. We have lost wisdom. God says, let me offer that to you. Let me offer you the closest thing to the tree of life you're going to get in this life. Let me offer you a taste of the flourishing that you can even hope to enjoy forever in its fullness when Jesus returns and all things are made new and everything is set right. And so, in verses 19 and 20 there of Proverbs chapter 3, where I've asked you to open your Bible, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps were broken up and the skies drip with dew. Wisdom is the operating system of creation. We too often focus on the apps. That's how we want to approach life, is we're about the apps, the specific functions we want out of life and what we want to do in the moment. This is wisdom. Wisdom is operating system level reality, something far more fundamental. And just like your apps won't work if you don't update your phone and the operating system. You got to keep Android updated. You got to get your new OS, whatever you do. I'm no judge. So too with life. If you don't get the operating system right, the apps aren't going to work. Okay? And so, one of the things we need to understand, again, still in chapter 3 there, her ways are pleasant ways. All her paths are peace. When we hear the word peace, again, just kind of like salvation, too often we want to think about it in negative terms. Salvation is the opposite of going to hell, being lost. No, in the Bible, that's part of it, but more concretely, God wants us to flourish. He wants us to become Christ-like. He wants a quality of life to flourish in us. He wants us to bear his image properly again, not just not be bad. So too, when we hear the word peace too often, we think primarily in negative terms. Peace is the absence of conflict, the lack of strife or trouble. We think primarily in negative terms when we hear the word peace. Peace means there's no violence, there's no war. But in the Bible, peace, shalom, it's a positive term. In the Bible, there is no peace if there is not flourishing. And that's what God is offering us to us. So the question becomes here, I'm going to skip through that for sake of time. The question becomes, what would eating this tree of life look like today, concretely, in our own time? What specific proverbs? If this is, chapter 3 in the early chapters of Proverbs, these big thematic 30,000-foot ideas. Chapter 10 on, where you get those specific proverbs, what we usually think of, the pithy sentence statements that you got to think on for a while and turn over in your head, because there's often more than meets the eye. First meaning is not last meaning when you read Proverbs. When we begin to comb through those specific things, how do those things, what emerges out of there that undergirds what the early chapters are saying, what chapter 3 in particular is saying, that this is a tree of life? Well, a couple of things begin to emerge when you begin to kind of connect the dots and go through the individual proverbs there in chapters 10 through 29 or so. And number one is this, that you find life, capital L, life, the roots of flourishing. You find it not when all the big stuff is perfect in your life. Perfect health, perfect financial situation, all your kids are behaving in the back seat of the car, and there is no turmoil. Everybody's getting along with your in-laws, you're getting along with your outlaws, you're getting, just everything is just so. It's not about the big stuff, because you know what? Those seasons never last long in life. Something's always just around the corner, right? Those of you who have lived longer know what we're talking about. So if you're looking for everything, all the big stuff to be rightly ordered, perfectly maintained, that doesn't last long even when those seasons come. Where is life and flourishing really found for the long haul then? It's not found in the perfect stability of all the big stuff. Because there's always going to be problems at work, problems at school, problems with your health, problems in the church. No, life is found in the small stuff. And the ability to enjoy the simple things and appreciate the simple things and focus on the little things. The mundane stuff of daily life matters. That's part of what overall the book of Proverbs is trying to communicate, that the stuff of God is found in ordinary life. The big decisions in life, the big moments, they do have due impact on the course our lives take. When we make decisions to get married, when we make decisions to have children, when we make decisions to change careers, those things do matter, and they certainly have an impact. That's why we focus on them so much. But what the book of Proverbs is trying to say is we too often focus so much on that we realize that most of life, and the stuff that we are most likely to be able to control in life, is the little stuff, and that you can build a really good life. You can flourish if you'll simply appreciate more and take seriously more the seemingly small stuff that's all around us in our daily existence. The myriad of routine decisions, actions, and habits that we constantly do without taking a moment's notice or paying much attention are just as much the things that over the long haul shape the quality and experience of our lives as the occasional big things do. Just like water flowing over a rock over the centuries will shape it just as much as a couple of big blows from a hammer or a pick, so too do the seemingly small things add up over time, like water flowing over a rock, to shape the ultimate outcome of what our lives are. The tapestry of daily habits and acts really does have as much to say about the quality of our lives over the long term as do those occasional big moments of decision. And so, for instance, you begin to think about that. Proverbs chapter 27 and verse 6. You just begin to kind of pull things from all around the book of Proverbs that illustrate this. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. And similar to that, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. All those little conversations, especially the conversations we don't like to have, they matter. Those conversations that we push off, those conversations that we get frustrated with because somebody tells us something that we don't want to hear, those matter. Those long-term, seemingly small relationships that we aren't intentional about. Yet Proverbs 13 and verse 20, that one's not on the screen. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Being intentional about the circle you build is going to affect the outcome of your life. Who do you relate to? Do you just relate to people who tell you what you want to hear because that's easy? Or do you seek out people who tell you what you need to hear even though that's harder and more uncomfortable? Or what about this? Proverbs 25 and verse 17, a little comic relief here. Let your foot rarely be in your neighbor's house, or he will become weary of you and hate you. You do realize when somebody says come over any time, they don't really mean it. That's part of the... And when people say anything you need, no, only ask once or twice. If we even teach us to our kids sometimes, right? Because some of our kids hear an adult say, they really want us to come over all the time. No, I know you like their house because they got the pool room upstairs or whatever. They really don't want us over all the time. Let your foot rarely be in your neighbor's house, or else you're going to become that guy in the congregation. You're going to become that family in the school. Little things. Big moral issues? No. But interact with people, the kind of relationships we have with people, when we are self-aware enough to know that we don't need to always be out and about in everybody else's business. Same thing, Proverbs 27 and verse 14. He who blesses his friend with a loud voice in the early morning, it will be reckoned a curse to him. Because God doesn't like morning people either. No, that's not what that means. But think about what it's actually saying. You went to bless. You intended to do somebody good. You're just trying to do good. You want to bless them. But you're doing it at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so your blessing is going to be received more as an annoyance who throws firebrands, arrows, and death. So is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, oh, I was just kidding. You ever do that? Or know somebody who does that? somebody who says unfortunate or even awkward things, and then when they begin to realize it was a faux pas, oh, I was just kidding. Oh, I didn't know that was your house. I didn't know that was your kid. And it gets awkward. Does that affect life? Yeah, that affects life. Or what about this? What about this? Oops, wrong click. A gray head is a crown of glory. It is found in the way of righteousness. And the glory of young men is their strength. The honor of old men is their gray hair. We live in a culture obsessed with youth. It used to be that young people wanted to get older because there came more responsibility. There came more privileges. There came more people taking you seriously. I remember when I was a young preacher just starting out, I was in my 20s. And the deacon who said this to me, he was actually one of my biggest patrons and fans in the congregation. He was not trying to be insulting at all. He did not mean it dismissively. He just wanted me to understand wisdom, how the world works. And he said to me one day, very gently and kindly, he said, Jeff, don't take it personally. No one takes you seriously until you're 30. And he wasn't being dismissive. He wasn't saying, I want to do a good job or anything like that. It was just, this is how the world works. One of the perks of getting older is people will listen to you more. But we live in a culture in which older people will pay a lot of money to look younger. And there's nothing wrong with it in and of itself. But because we are a death-denying, death-defying culture, we've lost sight of the fact that there is a certain benefit, a certain wisdom in accepting aging, that there are things you can do when you're 60. There are things you can accomplish when you are 60. That no matter how good technically you are at something, you will simply not be accepted, acknowledged. You'll not have the gravitas, you'll not have the clout, you'll not have the ability to do it when you're 25 or 30 years old, even if you were right about everything you say. And so we joke about getting older. I joke about getting older. But wisdom says, that's a good season of life too. Every season of life has a perk. That's what verse 29 of chapter 20 say. There's something to be said for being young. You can move furniture. But there really is something to be rejoiced in about getting older as well. And maybe part of why we don't always rejoice in aging is because we didn't use our youth well enough to make the aging worth it when we get there. We didn't work towards wisdom. We didn't live our lives wisely and flourishing when we were younger, so that the gray hair really is a crown of glory. Because I will tell you what I have learned over the years of my life, and I see this certainly much more in the world than I do in the church, but there's nothing sadder than meeting somebody in the world who's 75 or 80 years old, gray hair or maybe even no hair, and they're still trying to act like they're 30. And that's all they got. And even if they wanted to try to act their age, they wouldn't know how to do it because how they've spent the decades they've been given. And so there's something for getting older. And there's something for accepting that. So lots of Proverbs, and you can read through on your own and find them. But what's it all add up to? There's a lot of the little stuff in life that collectively adds up to a life well lived. It adds up to flourishing. And so that's part of the power of the Proverbs, is to find life in the little stuff and realize that's just as much an impact, the flourishing in life that you experience, as those occasional large decisions we have to make. All right. That's number one. Number two is a big one, that the flourishing life is not solely a function of finances. Now, does money matter? Of course it matters. And part of that's by God's design. Money is part of the curse. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread. That's part of fallenness. There is a place for that. Money, in our modern capitalist economy, money is how we measure the sweat of our brow. And that's how we trade our sweat for some cash, and that's where we get the food, right? So that there's a place for that. Money, in a sense, having some money is a mark of the fact that we are submitting to the curse that God has placed upon us rather than trying to freeload off of others. We're doing our part to accept our fallenness and the consequences of it. And so there's a place for money. And you're not going to flourish without money. And that's why in the Proverbs, there are Proverbs about money management, because part of living wisely is accepting the fact that you got to have some and you got to use it wisely and well when you do have it. But what Proverbs also wants us to understand is that there are ways to be rich beyond money. Poverty and shame will come to him who neglects discipline, but he who regards reproof will be honored. Your reputation matters. And that's a form of wealth. In fact, that may be one of the greatest forms of wealth. Because ultimately, in one sense, where you work and who you work for will be a function of what other people think of you. One of the things that I have learned over the years, I used to think you just need to get a good college degree and then brush up your resume and the jobs will come pouring in. What I've learned in my own life and in watching other people in life who have been successful in their careers is that it's never what you know, it's who you know. And all sorts of good resumes never get people anywhere because they don't have a network that will open doors in the right places to fully use what they're capable of in their skills. And anybody who's ever had to apply online for jobs understands exactly how that works. Most of us get the best opportunities we get because of people we know, but the people we know will only recommend us and be willing to recommend us, depending on the kind of people that we actually are. Proverbs 13 and verse 18 taps into that dynamic. And then the others that kind of pair together well. Proverbs 12 and verse 11. He who tills his land will have plenty of bread, but he who pursues worthless things lacks sense. Oh, young people. Got a few in here who are still making choices or maybe making career choices early on. Everybody tells you to follow your dream. Let me give you some truth. Your dream may be a dream and it may be good in of itself. But if your dream doesn't pay the bills, that's bad advice. Nobody has a right to follow their dream on somebody else's nickel. And so all that we hear in the education system, you be true to you, you follow your dreams. And people just need to be aware of following their dream. You need to work smarter and harder. And it needs to be something worthwhile that's actually productive. The one who pursues worthless things lacks sense. By the same token, Proverbs 28 verse 19 pairs well with that. He who tills his hand will have plenty of food, but he who follows empty pursuits will have poverty and plenty. Following your dream in our culture, what people mean by that is a way to poverty. We talk about the starving artist for a reason. But it's not just following empty pursuits. So be careful when you pick that major in college and you take all of those student loans. I mean, there's a joke. And listen, I've got several humanities degrees, so I point the finger at myself. But I had a plan for how I was still going to have a job when I got out with my humanities type degrees. But the reality is, the old joke goes, what you say to, what somebody who has a philosophy degree says? Do you want fries with that? Listen, I come from that side of the campus. I can say that. But the reality is, if you want that kind of degree, and listen, I'm a big believer that knowledge is worth it for its own sake, but not at the expense of being unemployable when you got a wife and kids on the backside. Skills matter. And then go back and audit a few classes when you're in your 40s. Or you know what? You can read some of those books for free. I'm just saying. But we don't tell young people that enough. And so kids get out of college with tons of student debt and are absolutely shocked that their creative writing degree is not going to lead to a job that can even begin to pay back on their student loans. Not going to flourish in life if somebody doesn't tell you the hard truth about that. You want to save up your money and do that for quality of life, by all means do that. But you got to be realistic about the fact that not all pursuits are profitable. But there's other things to worry about. And it's not just about how much you make, it's about how you spend it. Proverbs 21 verse 17, he who loves pleasure will become a poor man, and he who loves wine and oil will not become rich. You know how I know that it's not a factor of how much money you make, whether or not you're going to be rich? Because all I have to do is look at retired professional athletes. You realize most NFL athletes within 5 years of retirement are bankrupt. True, look it up, Google it. Exact statistics will vary, but something along that line is basically how it works. Most professional athletes are bankrupt within a few years. Why? Because what do all those guys do when they make their first couple $1 million? What do they go out and they do? The list that came out of things that he was spending his money on, just staggering. It's not about what you make, it's about how much you spend. And that's what Proverbs 21 verse 17. So young people, again, you're just starting your financial life. You want to flourish in life. It's not about making more money. It's about making sure you don't spend everything you make, no matter how much you make. And by the same token, Proverbs 24 and verse 27. Prepare your work outside and make it ready for yourself in the field. Afterwards, then build your house. First things first. Take care of what you need to do to be productive. and then spend your money on other things. Priorities in working and spending. Because see, here's what this looks like today, is for too many young people. Again, you get out of college and you've got a bunch of student debt, and what's the first thing that so many young people want to do when they get their first serious paycheck from their first big boy or big girl job? Some of us have even done it. What do too many young people do when they're still up to their gills in debt and they're just getting started, and they're going to be the first to be laid off or furloughed in a couple of years if the economy takes a hiccup because they're the newest and least experienced? What do so many young people, though, do when they get that first paycheck? They go out and buy this brand new car. They go out and buy a brand new car. They're still in serious debt, no meaningful savings, and their current car works. It may not be fun, it's not cool, I've been driving it for 5 years, I'm tired of duct taping it. But they go and they take on more debt before they even got a handle on their beginnings of their finances. That's not the way, Proverbs says, practically speaking, that's not the way to flourish in life. Prepare your work outside, make it ready for yourself in the field. Afterwards, then you start building your house. First things first with your finances. Or what about this one? Proverbs 27, verse 23. Know well the condition of your flocks and pay attention to your herds. For riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure to all generations. When the grass disappears, the new growth is seen. The herbs of the mountains are gathered in, and the lambs will be for your clothing. The goats will bring the price of a field. There will be goat's milk enough for your food, for the food of your household and the sustenance of your maidens. Pay attention to what's going on with your flocks and herds. Don't sit there and say, I've got so many animals, I don't have to pay attention anymore. What does that look like today? Pay attention every time you're swiping that credit card or that debit card. Pay attention. Because $5 here, $5 there, $10 here, $10 there. What does that do over time? It adds up. It's not the big single purchases that get you into trouble. It's the million of small ones over the course of a month that get you in trouble. Ernest Hemingway, in one of his books of fiction, was describing a character in the book, and a couple of characters were talking about how a character had gone bankrupt. And one of them asked, he had so much money, how did this happen? And one of the other characters said back, he went bankrupt slowly and then suddenly. Those of you who've been around a while know exactly what that looks like and what he means by that. Slowly, because it was a long-term reckless spending where no matter, again, how much you have, death by 1,000 cuts. And so what do? You better be making sure you know that what goes out matches what comes in, rather than just swiping the card, which is so easy to do. Because you're not going to be flourishing if you get careless with your finances. But even still, the book of Proverbs, besides giving practical advice about money, because that's part of flourishing, well managing what you have, there's an even more important, deeper issue in what it means to be rich in the first place. Because there is one who pretends to be rich, but has nothing. And another who pretends to be poor, but has great wealth. You can't judge somebody's financial situation, and young people especially, those of you who are young adults, hear me on this. You cannot judge people's financial situation by where they live or what they drive. Because they may be up to their gills in debt to have it, and be one missed paycheck away from repossession. In Texas, we call it all hat, no cattle. You look like a cowboy, but you have no herds, man. You look like you got stuff, but the truth of the matter is you are mortgaged to the hilt to look like you're better off than you are. Ultimately, it's better to actually have your finances in order than actually be spending in a luxurious way. How much better is it to get wisdom than gold? And to get understanding is to be chosen above silver. There's another kind of economy out there that's not economic, guys. You ever wonder who gets to decide what wealth is anyways? When you hear the word wealth, what do we always immediately think of? Well, we think of assets. We think about money. We think about investments. We think about real estate assets. Who gets to decide what wealth is anyways? What that word really means? I mean, you ever think about this? What is wealth fundamentally? What is wealth? Well, okay, it's gold and it's silver. Okay, but what is gold and silver? Where does it come from? Gold and silver comes from the ground. You ever seen what gold or silver looks like when it first comes out of the ground? Usually just a little bit of something in a rock. They got to crush the rock and filter it, and you got to crush a lot of rock to. So you realize at the end of the day, all gold and silver really are shiny rocks. That's all they are. And somewhere a few thousand years ago, the human race collectively, in its infinite wisdom, decided the way we're going to keep score in life is by shiny rocks we pull out of the ground. And for several thousand years, across all cultures, times, and places, even with all our great technology, we know so much better than the ancients. This is one thing we still follow the ancients in. How do we keep score in life? Shiny rocks. That's how we do it. Because that's all it is. Except in our modern time, we one up the ancients. We don't just do shiny rocks, so we still do shiny rocks. Open up your wallet and pull out whatever you got. And what's it made of? What's it made of? Plastic or paper? Just like they ask you in the grocery store. Plastic and paper. Oh, well, yeah, they're bits and bytes now. It's not even tangible. Think about it. Paper. Well, why is the piece of paper in your wallet more valuable than this piece of paper I've got right now? In fact, I will trade you your small piece of paper in your wallet for my big piece of paper. Do you want to make that trade? No, because you've already heard what I've got to say on this piece of paper. You say, you know it's not worth it. But no one will make that trade. I'll give you more paper for less paper. But nobody will do that. Why? Because we literally decided not just that paper in general is worth that much, but that specific pieces of paper are worth something. And why are those specific pieces of paper worth something? Think about this. Simply because the government, which is we the people, said so. That's all that stuff is, folks. Think about it. We decided that certain pieces of paper are more important than other pieces of paper. We decided that plastic is the measure of all. And collectively, that's what we call wealth. And people will live and die over that. What wealth really is what you value and what's truly valuable. And the Bible, as you well know, has a very different perspective on that. Is there some, being material creatures with material needs, is there a place for material? Yeah, there is a place, but that's not real wealth. That's not real wealth. Real wealth is something else. As Proverbs 15 and verse 17 points out. Better is a dish of vegetables where love is than a fatted ox served with hatred. It's better to live off vegetables than go to the steakhouse. If the vegetables come with love, good relationships, friendship, loyalty. Better is a dry family tree. That's a form of wealth because so many people, especially when we get this right now in our fallen apart culture, so many people come from families that are utterly dysfunctional. And they bear the baggage of that. You come from a good family line, good family tree, that's wealth. Or a good name, more to be desired than great wealth. Favor is better than silver and gold. And so part of what happens as well is this. Here's a stunning proverb. Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied, nor are the eyes of man ever satisfied. Sheol was the Hebrew way of talking about the afterlife, the underworld, and Abaddon was destruction. Because think about it. Well, I've harvested enough souls for this century. Y'all just take the next couple decades off. We'll call a moratorium from 2080 to 2100, and then when the 22nd century rolls around, we'll do enough because the first part of the 21st century, I harvested enough souls. Death ever do that? Did death ever say, I've got enough for now? No. So too the eyes of man. And it's not a happy comparison because if what you're doing in life can be compared with death, that's not a good metaphor for you. But the wise man knows what he's doing, comparing the insatiable appetite for more that humans have with death, because it is a way of death. You will never flourish in life if you do not know how to say, I have enough. And the truth of the matter is, again, and young people hear me on this, it's not a function of how much you have, because both the rich and the poor will answer the question, how much is enough, in the exact same way. How much is enough? Just a little bit more. What always happens. Ask somebody who's older if that's exactly the temptation. Ask somebody who's retired if that's the temptation as they went through their career. You get your first job, you're making, let's say, $60,000 a year, and you think, man, when I make 80, then I'll be there. And you get that promotion, you get to 80, and all of a sudden, but now you got a wife and a couple of kids, and all of a sudden 80, man, when I get to 100, 100's where it's at, man. I'm going to work hard, I'm going to get that promotion. When I get to 100, and you get to 100, but now the problem is you need a bigger house, or you want a bigger house. And so now it's, when I make 125, man, I'm going to keep working, when I make 125, ask somebody who's retired, you young people, if that's not the temptation you face. Every time you hit that milestone when you said, if I can just make this much more, it'll be enough. And you know what happens when you get there? Oh, it's not enough. Because while I do believe there is such a thing as not enough, most of us don't know it. Most of us, many of us at least, will probably never know it. And so the issue for most of us is an intentional decision called contentment. That what I have is enough. And I'm not going to go the way of Sheol and Abaddon. There is a story I like. I actually saw it on the wall of a fast food place many years ago. That's where you go to find wisdom, is on the walls of fast food joints. And maybe some of you have seen this same sign somewhere. Maybe you're familiar with the story. American businessman was standing at the pier of a small coastal Mexican fishing village when a small boat with just one fisherman docked. Inside the small boat were several large tuna. The American complimented on the quality of this fish. How long did it take you to catch them? The American on vacation asked, still thinking of business at all times. Only a little while, the Mexican replied. Well, why don't you stay out longer and catch more fish? The American asked. I have enough to support what I need for my family today, the Mexican said. Well, the American asked, what do you do with the rest of your time? And the Mexican fisherman said, well, I sleep late and I fish a little and I play with my kids. I take a nap with my wife. I stroll into the village each evening where I play guitar with my friends. I have a full and busy life, and it is a good life, sir. The American scoffed at that. No, he says, I have an MBA from Harvard. That means I can help you. So what you need to do is you need to spend more time fishing and catch more fish. And with the proceeds of catching more fish, you're going to buy a bigger boat. And when you have a bigger boat, then you're going to be able to catch even more fish. And with the proceeds of having a bigger boat and catching more fish, you're going to buy several boats. And eventually what you're going to do is you're going to have a whole fleet of fishing boats. And then what you're going to do when you have a whole fleet of fishing boats, you're catching all those fish, is instead of selling your catch to middlemen, you're going to sell directly to consumers. Eventually you're going to open your own canning. And then what you're going to do is you're going to have vertical integration. That's what we call it in the U.S. You're going to control product processing and distribution. That's what you learn when you get an MBA from Harvard. And then what you're going to do is you're going to need to leave this small coastal fishing village. You're going to need to go to Mexico City. And eventually when your business keeps growing, you're going to go to L.A. and eventually New York City, where you're going to run your expanding fishing empire from. The Mexican fisherman said, how long is all that going to take? The American said, about 15, 20 years. The fisherman said, okay, and then what? The American laughed and said, well, that's the best part. And then when the time is right, you're going to announce your IPO. You're going to work with Goldman Sachs. You're going to sell company stock to the public, and you're going to become very, very rich. Rich beyond your wildest dreams. Millions beyond millions beyond millions. Millions, senor, the Mexican said. Then what? And then the American said slowly, well, then you can retire and move to a small coastal fishing village where you can sleep late, fish a little, play with your kids, take a nap with your wife, stroll into the village, play guitar with your friends. What's it all for? What are you trying to accomplish? Where is the life we have lost in living? Eliot asked nearly 100 years ago. And so that's what I've got for you tonight. That's where I'm going to stick a pin in it. Be wise. Live with the grain of creation. It's not going to make you live forever, but it's going to give you the best possible quality of life right here, right now, this side of eternity. And that's what the book of Proverbs offers to you. Thanks for your time and attention.